That particular morning arrived carrying a cold that had no interest in apologies. "Officer." Marcus Webb stepped out of his cruiser and felt it immediately. A biting, bone-deep freeze that turned every exhale into a small cloud of mist. He pulled his collar up and started down the block. The street was practically empty. A few bundled-up shop owners were out with shovels. A stray coffee cup tumbled past on a gust of wind. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that should have made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. But it did. He slowed his pace, scanning the length of the pavement ahead. Years of working the streets had wired him to notice the things that didn't quite fit, the small wrongnesses. Most people walked right past. Then he spotted it. At the far end of the block, pressed against the iron fence bordering Greenway Park, there was a shape, too low to be an adult, too still to be playing. A child, sitting in the snow, alone. Marcus quickened his stride, his breath shortening now for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. As he drew closer, the shape sharpened into a little girl, maybe 9 years old, wearing a jacket far too thin for a morning like this. Her hair dusted white from the snowfall. Pressed against her side was a dog, a large German shepherd with a soldier's posture. Back straight, ears up, eyes locked on Marcus with the focused intelligence of an animal that had been trained for something serious. Around the dog's neck hung a cardboard sign, handwritten, 4 words, $5 for sale. Marcus stopped mid-step, not because of the price, not because of the sign, because he recognized what was standing in front of that little girl and he couldn't make sense of why it was there. "Hey there," Marcus said, keeping his voice soft. "Everything okay out here?" The girl raised her face. Her eyes were swollen and raw, her cheeks streaked from crying. She looked at him the way children look at strangers when they've run out of other options, with a hope so fragile it almost hurt to see. "Sir," she said quietly, "would you buy my dad's dog?" Marcus felt the question hit him somewhere between the chest and the stomach. Something was very wrong here, and he needed to find out what. Part 1. The girl by the fence. The morning officer Marcus Webb laced up his boots. He hadn't expected anything unusual. 17 winters on the force had given him a working understanding of how his patrol days tended to go: steady, predictable, and mostly unremarkable. He found peace in that. The hum of the radio, the rhythm of his own footsteps, the way the world simplified itself at 6 in the morning when most of it was still asleep. Days like this one reminded him that the job, underneath all its weight, still had room for quiet. He was 3 blocks into his route when that quiet shattered. The girl didn't look up when he first approached. She was focused on the dog, her small fingers working through the thick fur along his shoulders. The animal sat perfectly still, beneath her touch. Not restless the way a stray would be, not uncertain the way an untrained dog would be. This one was settled, contained, purposeful. "What's his name?" Marcus asked, crouching down to her level. She glanced at the dog, then at Marcus. A brief negotiation seemed to happen behind her eyes. "Rex," she said. "He was my dad's." "Was." She looked back at the dog. "Dad can't work anymore. He got really sick." Rex was his K9 partner for 7 years. They retired together. Marcus studied the animal again, the measured stillness, the alert posture, the quiet authority. He'd spent enough time around working dogs to recognize one on sight. This wasn't a pet someone had lost or abandoned. This was a veteran. "And you're selling him?" Marcus kept his voice even. "For $5? Her chin trembled. She stroked Rex's ear once, slowly. "If I sell him, maybe he goes somewhere warm, somewhere they can feed him properly. And maybe I can use the money for Dad's medicine." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Did your father send you out here to do this?" She shook her head. "He doesn't know. I left before he woke up." She looked directly at Marcus then, really looked at him, and said the thing that he would replay in his head for years. Afterward, "I'm not selling him because I want to. I'm selling him because keeping him might kill him." Part 2. Everything she'd been hiding. Marcus sat down in the snow. Not standing, not hovering, sitting. Same level as her, same cold ground. He needed her to understand that he wasn't just passing through. "Tell me everything," he said. "All of it. Not just the part you think I need to hear." She hesitated. Rex shifted slightly and pressed his nose against her wrist. A push. She exhaled. Her father, Thomas, had spent 11 years in law enforcement. Rex had been beside him for 7 of them. They'd worked narcotics operations, tracked missing persons, through forests in the middle of the night, assisted on armed response calls that most officers never wanted to talk about afterward. They came the fire. A commercial building, a rescue call. Thomas had gone in looking for a trapped worker. The floor above gave way and a beam came down across his back. He couldn't get up. He couldn't breathe. Rex found him in the smoke, burned his own paws on the hot debris, pulled, kept, pulling, got him out. Thomas survived, but his lungs never recovered. The damage was permanent, progressive, worsening with each cold season. The department gave him a medical pension and sent him home. For a while, they kept things together. Thomas was proud and careful with money, and he told his daughter every week that things were under control, that something would turn around soon. Nothing turned around. The specialist bills multiplied. The heating stopped working in early winter. The pension covered less than half of what they actually needed. Dad doesn't want anyone to know, the girl said. She was picking at a loose thread on her coat sleeve. He says if people find out we're struggling, it means he failed us. She paused. He didn't fail us. He got hurt doing his job. That's different. Marcus nodded slowly. How long has it been since you had a full meal? She didn't answer immediately. I stopped eating dinner a while ago. I told Dad I wasn't hungry. I wasn't lying. Not really. When you're worried enough, you stop feeling hungry. And Rex? She swallowed. I gave him my lunch. He kept trying to give it back. He'd bring it over and drop it at my feet. So I started hiding it under my mattress until he'd eaten everything. Marcus pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, just breathed. This child had quietly dismantled her own well-being, piece by piece, meal by meal, to keep her father and his dog from suffering. And she'd done it alone, in silence, without asking anyone for a single thing. Last night, she continued, Rex started shaking, like deep shaking, the kind that doesn't stop. I put my jacket on him and sat up all night. When morning came, I knew I couldn't wait anymore. She looked at the dog. If something happens to Rex, it'll devastate my dad. He can't lose him. Not on top of everything else. Marcus stood up. The decision had already been made. He just needed to say it out. Loud. Take me to your house, he said. I need to meet your father. Part 3. The house that was still fighting. The neighborhood around them grew quieter and older as they walked. The houses here had been standing for decades, and you could feel it in the patched driveways, the weathered window frames, the way each property seemed to be holding itself, together through stubbornness alone. Thomas's house sat at the end of a short road. The porch had a sag on one side, the paint was lifting at the edges. A thin, reluctant thread of smoke rose from the chimney, barely enough to suggest the fire inside was still alive. The girl unlocked the front door and pushed it open. Cold rolled out into the street. Not as cold as outside, but close. The front room was lit by a single lamp working harder than it should have had to. Everything inside was tidy, carefully, deliberately tidy. Dishes stacked and drying, a school bag packed and waiting by the door. A child's drawing pinned to the refrigerator, with the name Dad written in crayon at the top. This wasn't a home that had stopped trying. It was a home that was fighting with everything it had left. A figure shifted on the couch beneath a doubled-up blanket. Thomas sat up slowly, blinking at the light. When he registered the uniform, his whole body went still. Thomas, Marcus said carefully. My name is Officer Webb. Your daughter found me this morning. Thomas looked at the girl, then at Rex, who had crossed the room and rested his chin on Thomas's knee the moment he was close enough. Thomas's voice came out rough, worn thin by months of coughing. She was selling him. Not a question. He already knew. Marcus nodded. Thomas closed his eyes. A long, slow exhale. When he opened them, they were wet at the edges. She wasn't supposed to carry this, he said quietly. None of it. She's been carrying it for months, Marcus replied. And she's been doing it without complaint. Thomas looked at his daughter. She was watching him from the doorway, her arms folded across her chest, her chin lifted in a way that managed to look both terrified and determined. At the same time, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just opened his arms and she crossed the room and let him hold her. Part 4. The calls that changed everything. Marcus gave them a minute. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and got to work. He wasn't a social worker. He wasn't a case manager. He was a patrol officer with a phone and 17 years of knowing the right people. That, as it turned out, was enough. His first call was to the Law Enforcement Assistance Fund, a support organization specifically set up for officers injured or incapacitated in the line of duty. Thomas had never contacted them. He didn't know the retirement clause still made him eligible. He was eligible. The second call went to a sergeant Marcus had trained under 15 years earlier. Man who'd worked alongside Thomas during his early years on the force and had no idea what had happened to him after the fire. That sergeant made 4 more calls before noon. By early afternoon, the first knock came at Thomas's door. A former partner, grocery, bags in hand, looking slightly embarrassed that he hadn't come sooner. Another officer. Arrived 20 minutes later with medication Thomas had been rationing for weeks. A third brought a portable heater and stayed to help install it properly. Word moved through the department the way it always does when one of their own needs something, fast and with very little fuss. Within the week, a retired officer who ran a property management company had arranged reduced rent on a properly heated flat across town. A disability advocate began reviewing Thomas's case for benefits he'd never been told he could access. The girl sat on the floor of the living room throughout all of it, Rex's head in her lap, watching the room fill up with people. She wasn't selling anyone that day. She never would again. Ending 6 months later. 6 months on, Thomas could climb the stairs without stopping to rest at the top. His lungs would always carry the damage. That was permanent, and he'd made his peace with it. But with proper medication, a warm home, and the weight of secrecy finally lifted from both him and his daughter, something in him had settled. Rex slept at the foot of his bed every night, still alert, still loyal, still there. One evening, Thomas asked his daughter a question that had been sitting with him since that morning in the snow. "Why $5?" She considered it for a moment. "Because I knew nobody would actually pay it," she said. "I thought if the price was small enough, whoever stopped would stop because they were concerned, not because they wanted a bargain. I didn't want someone to buy Rex. I wanted someone to ask why he was for sale." Thomas stared at her. 9 years old. She'd engineered the whole thing. He laughed, a real one, the kind that hadn't visited him in months, and pulled her into his side. Rex immediately forced his way into the middle of it, tail sweeping in wide arcs. Somewhere on a street in this city, a little girl sat in the snow and asked a stranger to pay $5 for a dog she had no intention of giving away. She just needed someone to stop, to look, to stay. Officer Marcus Webb stopped. He looked. He stayed. And that one, in the end, was all it took. Call to action. If this story found you today, maybe it was meant to. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one person showing up can change everything. Leave a comment and tell us, which moment hit you the hardest? And where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories carry. Subscribe if you haven't already. We tell stories like this every week, and stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the quietest ways. We'll see you in the next one.